Well, hello there, Terrible Warriors. Welcome back. I'm Justin, and I'm not alone today. As you can tell from the title, we are doing another podcast spotlight. And in the past, we've talked to actual play podcasters. This one was too good to pass up. As you know, there are other series we've been doing. Session 0, where we have been making characters and talking about the character creation process of various different tabletop games, some that we've played on the show, some that we haven't because it wouldn't have been appropriate for our format, but character creation still works. We've been having a really fun time looking through this process and spending more time examining that part of the game that in a lot of actual plays sometimes gets skipped over or edited out or saved as a Patreon special bonus episode. And so we've had a really fun time having those conversations. And very recently, as you might remember, way back, we did a Kickstarter special for Ross Rifles with Dundas West Games, the creator Daniel Kwan, who came to join us on the show. He just very recently safely dropped off a physical copy of Ross Rifles that I had backed up from Kickstarter. And when I mentioned what we were doing with Session 0, he was like, "You've got to talk to this person." He got me in touch on Twitter, and we're connecting. He's with me now. Ryan Boelter of the Character Creation Cast, a podcast all about character creation process in tabletop games. Oh my goodness, that just sounds like good synergy. Welcome to Terrible Warriors, Ryan.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It's really great to be here.
So I've been looking now. It says you're in season 33, 35. Does that mean you haven't been doing it for 35 years?
Oh gosh,
so
no.
So what is a series in the Character Creation Cast? How long have you been at this? Because that's still a lot of episodes, a lot of interviews. What is Character Creation Cast?
Let's start at the beginning. Character Creation Cast is where we invite guests along the industry and in the community of the RPGs to learn about their favorite games through the lens of character creation. So we basically talk about the game with our guests, we learn a bit about it, and then we dive right into the character creation process. Sometimes that includes world building, which is really fun as well.
Yeah.
We go all the way up to the part where we would just start talking about, okay, what does our start look like? And then we stop. And we never play these characters. We put them in a nice little package and file them away for all of eternity, which is very sad. But
I've been feeling the same way. What we started doing is I've been going on to my partner's iPad and I've been drawing up the character sheets to make them look nice and posting them on our Patreon channel. So at least they live somewhere.
I know.
And we might pull them out in the future because some of the characters we've made in Session 0, I'm like, I really want to know more about what this Klingon chef is doing because he sounds like such a wonderful character. But now he's done and he's gone and we're off to the next game.
Yeah, so each series is basically 3 episodes a piece, and it's one series per month that is released. And a whole series goes over, the first 2 episodes are the learning about the game and character creation.
Wow.
Once that's done, we talk about the process with our guests. So we actually discuss how it went, how it compares to other games. And then we go through my favorite part, the fan fiction portion. Where we talk about, theoretically, if we did play, what would our characters be up to? And that's been really fun to kind of explore that headspace without actually, playing the game itself.
Yeah, extrapolate where that goes. We've, true story, way back on Terrible Warriors, we played the 7th Sea. And we did 4 episodes on that. We had a good time. And then we ended. And that was like 3 or 4 years ago now. And since then, my partner who was on that game with us, we go for hikes, and while we're walking, we just talk about what these 2 characters are still up to. And we have generated like years of content after that game ended on all the little places that they've gone to and all the characters they've met and so much. And we're still like years later, these characters live rent free in my head.
Oh, that's lovely.
And part of that fan fiction that you mentioned, that's, I love that. That's so fun.
Yeah, it's super wonderful. And one of our latest series, Anyone Can Wear the Mask, by Jeff Stormer, that game is basically that. You draw cards and you figure out kind of the scenario, and then you set up the scenario and you talk about, hey, what happened? You don't just like roll dice and for every action that you do, you're telling a story together instead of, actually role playing out scenes and stuff. And then you figure out where it goes from there. It's pretty cool.
So what got started? Why did you decide to get involved in this project at the very beginning? Why explore just this one phase in the game? Like, it's a very consequential phase, but as I was mentioning off the top, a lot of actual play podcasts, I mean, they might only be playing one game. So if they do character creation, it's one episode and then they never return to it ever again. And as new characters come in, we're not hearing that character being created. They just join the show. Or if they were like Terrible Warriors, where we did one shots, we only had so many hours. And if we did character creation, we had less time to do the story. So we would do that before we would record. We would make our characters and then we would record our game. And so for a lot of listeners who use actual plays as a place to learn tabletop, I found this was a part of the game that I'm sorry, I'm answering your question myself, that got ignored and got kind of pushed off to the back burner, even though without it, there's no game. So tell me, what for you, that was my inspiration to do our session 0 thing.
Yeah.
So for Character Creation Cast, why did you jump into doing this? And what was that inspiration for you?
So it was a cold day back in January 3rd of 2018, where I was just posting random stuff on Twitter, and I threw out there an alliterative character create cast podcast idea about this exact show, right? And the following day, I couldn't get the idea out of my head. I'm like, this doesn't seem to exist right now. Everything, like you just said, is all actual plays. Nobody's talking about like the first thing that you're supposed to do when you start playing a game, create characters. So I said to my podcast support group that I was in at the time, hey, I've got this idea. I really want to run with it, but I don't want to do it myself. And Amelia immediately said, ooh, pick me, pick me, pick me. This sounds awesome. And goodness gracious, we put our brains together over the next like couple of weeks or so, came up with a format for the show, recorded a couple test episodes, and then just started recording. And the rest is kind of history. We went from idea to release in less than 4 months, less than 3 months or so. Yeah, give or take.
Great. That's fast.
It was a whirlwind.
Yeah.
But once we got the nerves out of the way after that first recording, things were a blast. We covered so many different games, and we kind of got addicted to this whole interviewing amazing people and hearing them gush about things they love. So
Character Creation Class starts. You go through your 4 months of whirlwind, and what were those first games like? Was there a specific type of game you were focusing in on, like Powered by Apocalypse or indie or out of print? What were some of the choices that you were making on what games did you want to explore? Because if you just character creation and tabletop, I mean, it's all kind of lumped in as one genre, but within tabletop are hundreds of different iterations of how to play. Is it more rules and dungeon crawling or simulation, or is it more story and free form? You mentioned there's some games where character creation, we just did last week a game called Nibiru. There is no character creation. Your characters are amnesiacs. And so the game is world building and coming up with kind of a very loose concept of who your character thinks they are, but you're not going to get to create your character until after the game starts and you start creating your memories as you're rolling the dice and having flashbacks come upon you. And of course, I mentioned Powered by Apocalypse, and you mentioned world building. Some of these games you can't do by yourself. You have to do together as a group because you're answering questions from each other to form the rules of your world. So was there a choice on what kind of game you wanted to go through, or did you just start grabbing the ones off the shelf that were your favorites?
We didn't even grab our favorites right away. The first game that we covered was Dungeons and Dragons, mainly because we wanted to have the quote unquote most popular role-playing game as our first set of episodes.
It's the mold.
So people could find it. And then we would also have that kind of as a like a control test, right? So this is kind of the, if this is Dungeons and Dragons, compare this series to the rest of the series.
It is like the common language, isn't it? Like you can, no matter what game you're talking about, we haven't done D&D on our session 0, but we're constantly referencing it of a game like D&D, because even games that are so removed, you can't help it. It's classic rock, and it just you can't escape it. It's going to be there, and it is, no matter what. We've all played our own favorite little indie titles, but we all have a single common denominator. Yeah. Like it or hate it.
Exactly. Yeah. So
you start with D&D.
Started with D&D. We learned from Neil Powell and Tall Squall, two wonderful people in the community. And we went from D&D to our second series, Masks: A New Generation, powered by the Apocalypse. So we went from kind of very old to newer PBTA, and that was our first PBTA game that we really covered.
Was that like Whiplash for you? Masks is one of my favorite games.
Yeah, it was really interesting.
Tonally, it's very different. Like it is. When you make your characters in that game, you're also generating their origin stories and how they came together. And like Powered by Apocalypse games, you're answering questions that connect your social stories. So in D&D, you're making a character that's going to fit into a world the GM has made. In Masks, you're making a world that the GM is going to have to respond to. They're not very much in control of that world. Yeah. Right down to the names of their arch nemesis and that.
It was fantastic because we teamed up with the Protean City crew
fun.
for recording that series, and we actually created in-canon characters for their world.
Oh, that's fun.
So the characters that we created technically exist in the background of Protean City. One of those characters, Brandon Leon Gambetta's character, appeared actually on a few episodes of Protean City Comics. And one of the major antagonists and antagonistic corporations that person kind of leaded became a huge plot point in some of the storylines, which was really, really fun to see.
So you're getting your sea legs, as it were, with creating these characters. And that was back in 2018. You've done, if I'm correct, then, so every time you're doing a series, it's a new rule set that you're picking up, right? Mm-hmm. So you've done...
It is a new game, except for Series 19, which was three small games.
Like one-page RPGs, small, or?
It varied. There was a one-page, there was a few pages, and then there was like a 30-some-odd page one. And they were all games that were designed to create characters quickly and get up and running and play a game quickly, which was really fun. We did One Last Job. We did Inspectors. And we did Love and Justice by Senda Lino, which was a hack of lasers and feelings. We did that three episodes in a row, and we compared them all in the final episode, which was really interesting.
So 36 and counting games that you have gone through, plus give or take with those micro games. What has been you've got a much big view picture of what I'm getting into here with our Session 0 bit. And I'm only planning to do Session 0 maybe for the next year. So this was like a stopgap between our actual plays, just so I still was doing something. But for you, it's your main primary focus. So exactly. 2018, we're into the third or fourth year now. You've done 36 games. Yeah. What is the big takeaway that you've had with character creations? Was there anything that surprised you while you were looking through of commonalities or things that are really novel with character? What is it is there something that kept you hooked for this long that you're getting into?
It's just so different. Like every single game has their own quirks to character creation, right? And you go from games like D&D and Masks, and then our third series was Star-Crossed by Alex Roberts. Where it's a 2-player game.
It's the Jenga game.
Yeah. You play as basically people that really, really want to be together romantically, but they cannot because it would be very detrimental for whatever reason to do so. And once that tower falls, then, you know, your characters give into their feelings, and then you have points based on how many things you pulled. But the character generation, it really surprised us, because that series, we created 3 pairs of characters between myself, Amelia, and Alex. We got so invested in these characters and their stories, and the character creation is so fast in that game. There's only like maybe 6 or 8 questions or so, but it was genius, because like 1 or 2 of the questions, you have to hand your character sheet to the other player, and they have to fill something out for you. And you have a chance to say, no, I don't think so. But like, having that sort of trust before you even play the game in your other player, just like a relationship, you need to have that sort of trust with one another.
Yeah, that's genius for the theme of the game, where you're having to hand over.
It blew my mind. And then from there, like, you know, building up of what the game plays like and all that sort of stuff. Like, this game is brilliant.
Yeah, I've seen some examples online of it. They don't have to even be human. One of the examples was 2 dogs at a dog park. Their owners are moving to different cities. This will be the last day they meet at the dog park.
Yeah, it's wild.
And so there's no choice about it. Your relationship is doomed. You're never, and if you tried, you would have to run away from home and become a stray and die on the street.
Yeah, there's like a window, right? There's like a window of a certain amount of blocks you can pull. And if you get in that small window, then you have the perfect ending with one another. But if you get too many, it goes backwards a bit. And if you end the game with the tower still standing, then nothing ever happens.
And there's such an intention with that game of the kind of love between these 2 characters. Doesn't have to be sexual, doesn't even have to be romantic. It can be aromantic to a degree, and it can be like the AI and its developer and the artificial intelligence. If anyone found out, they'd shut it down, or they'd separate the 2 of you, and or 2 pro wrestlers, where if the world found out, their careers would be over. And so it's those were the 3 examples that I recall at the top of my head. And it just sounds like those 3 are all so different, and also none of those are ones that I immediately would have pegged to that game as character tropes that I would have expected would work so well.
Yeah, it was one of my favorite series. It still actually is probably my favorite series that we recorded after all this time, and it was our 3rd one. Somehow we peaked at 3.
And you've just been chasing that dragon ever since.
We have been. We got very close with Anyone Can Wear the Mask. But one of the big things that I'm taking away from all of these series is that the discussions kind of sometimes go places that we don't, anticipate right away. We had discussions on consent with Alex, and kind of went more in depth into that, and it was really, really helpful, I think, to a lot of people. And then other games that we covered, the discussions just kind of go into some really interesting places, especially when we're talking with the developers of the games. Kind of seeing their intent behind the design has been really eye-opening in a lot of cases.
Yeah, because a lot of these times, especially in a Powered by Apocalypse game or games like Spire that we just did, I find these they're not like classes like Dungeons and Dragons. There we go, comparing it again to D&D. But they're story prompts. They're ideas in a package where when you pick up that character, go to Masks, you pick up the legacy. It doesn't matter what your power is. That's like the last thing that matters about your character. What matters is you're the next in line of a many other heroes who have all shared this name, and you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders of all these expectations of what you are going to be as the next great Ultraman.
Yeah.
And so the designers of those games have those stories in mind when they make those tropes. And yet, of course, once you get a hand on that, you can run off with it and take them into places you didn't expect.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've covered, like, I've learned so much about how character creation is set up in all these different games, from the traditional where pick a character class and all that sort of stuff, all the way to the
roll your stats, pick your equipment.
Yeah, roll your stats, equipment, all that stuff, all the way to like anyone can wear the mask. We didn't even name our characters. We didn't describe them. We didn't give them pronouns. It was just the hero, the villain, the city, and we still had one of the best recordings, that we've had because of this phenomenal game where all three of these pieces, the hero, the city, and the villain, if you take any of them away, the whole game kind of falls apart a bit. And seeing how they are symbiotically related to one another just kind of blew our minds, and we just ran with it. It was fantastic.
That's really, I'm going to look into this game.
It is so good.
We've never recorded it, but the two games, ironically, they don't have character creation baked into them.
Yeah.
And yet looking back, the characters that came out of those games are the ones that still give me chills when I recall the whole story. Was Fall of Magic.
Okay.
Which is played entirely on a scroll with coins as your character tokens.
Oh, wow.
All you are told at the beginning is magic is dying. The Magus is dying with it. We travel together to Umbra, to where magic was born. And that's it.
Oh.
That's all the world building you are going to be given. Every single time you read that to a different table, they are going to take different things from that.
Oh.
And I've played games where the Magus dying is a good thing because they're an evil despot.
Yeah.
They're a Sauron character. Or the Magus is an organization, an army that's chasing you to Umbra. Or magic dying is terrible. Nature is going and dying with it. Or magic is dying. This is wonderful. We'll finally be free of the magic that holds this whole world in frozen ice.
Yeah.
And so we travel to Umbra. So the goals and the reasons differ every single time you play. You then have a choice of a name and an origin that you pick. You just basically circle from the left of the scroll.
Yeah.
And then it drops you into a location on the map. And all you are given at this point is story prompts like your face in the water or the last time you saw magic. And you tell a story. You free form, you role play, and the scene ends when you use that prompt.
Nice.
And so you're on the bridge, your face in the water. That can be thrown from the bridge, or you look down, you see your reflection, and the scene comes to an end. And then when everyone has picked a prompt from that location, they move the coin tokens to the next location on the map. They fall, and there's some forks in the road along the way where you can choose different directions. And then you have a scene for the whole group, including the Magus.
Oh, wow.
And the Magus is collaboratively controlled by the whole table.
Yeah.
There's no GM. And then once you arrive at the location, you each break off and you each pick a different prompt. And you all go around until you've each had your moment, and then you go to the next location on the map. And you keep going until either you run out of time and the story ends, or you reach the end of the scroll and the story ends. And there's so many different ways it can go. And the deeper into the scroll, the more introspective those prompts become.
That's interesting.
And the more I find emotional and sad and dark and challenging the story gets. And every single time somehow we get to the end and it feels like the whole thing was like orchestrated by fate and came around full circle. And yet that the characters, when you start the game, are not in any way defined. You don't know anything about them. And one minor spoiler that you don't know the very first time you play the game is that all the locations that you can choose, like you can be a prince of Stormhold. Well, Stormhold is an actual place on the scroll that you might get to. And you're told not to unroll the whole scroll, but to roll it only what you need to see as you're playing. And so to not to see everything. So when you arrive in Stormhold, if you pick the Prince of Stormhold, well, now you're the Prince of Stormhold. Why were you all the way back at the beginning? Why are you with the Magus? And so you might have already been building up the world that you're in exile, and now you're back in town, and you're having to confront your world building that you were just free forming with. And the other game that's given me chills that has no character creation at all, and yet those characters still stick with me, is For the Queen.
Oh, yes. Oh my gosh.
And For the Queen is a card game where you are traveling together as a group to a distant land to broker a peace for a war you have always known. And the Queen has chosen you to be part of her retinue because she knows you love her. That's all the world building you're given. And then the game begins and you start drawing from the top of the deck, a deck that you shuffle that starts giving you prompts. Like the last time you saw it's very much the same rules as Fall of Magic. The last time you saw the Queen's cruelty, or things like that. And you narrate around. And as you pick those cards, you begin to discover who at the table is playing whom. And in the game we played, I was actually a prisoner of war that the Queen was holding on to me and returning me to this land to broker that peace.
Oh, wow.
But she was like a Sauron, like evil Hive Queen character who fed on the emotions of everyone around her as her language. It was getting really out there, very eldritch
so
stories. And so my character, for some reason, had been kept as a plaything because I was able to survive this feeding process in the ways that others couldn't. Then there was another character who was like her right hand, who played chess because she was immune entirely to this power. And so she would play games of strategy with her and worked as like a lieutenant or like the hand of the Queen or things like that, because she could speak for the Queen because the Queen herself didn't use words. She spoke only in feeling. And so this alien creature is taking to this land that when we arrive, the land is dead and it's all salt and blasted away. And there was no peace. There was no war. There was no plan. This was actually a long drawn out suicide note from the Queen.
Oh, wow.
Where she had never intended to return. This was her going to the elephant graveyard.
Oh, my.
And bringing us with her.
You just
like
gave me
the soldiers
goosebumps.
To be buried in the tomb.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Oh my gosh.
And of course, this game is told collaboratively, so no one knows where it's going until at the very end, somewhere in the middle of the deck, you've shuffled in a card that says the Queen is under attack. You defend her. And one person at the table just said no. And he didn't explain why. And he never explained what happened after.
Oh.
And when we wanted to like, well, what happens next? What happens goes like, the game's over. It ended.
Oh, wow.
The credits are rolling now.
Oh.
Right. And he just left it like the end of The Sopranos.
Oh no.
Right. And it just cuts to like that. And so we're left to speculate and write fan fiction about our own game.
Yeah.
Because he wouldn't commit anything more to the story. He's like, that's how it went.
Yeah, absolutely.
He just stood back and he refused to draw his blade and he let them descend on her. And, and the rest of us all like died in her defense. And, and it was just one of those like, yeah, and yet there was no character creation process.
Yeah,
there was, but it was through the game itself.
Yeah.
And anyway, I don't know. I think it was something you were saying about Anyone Can Wear the Mask that just set me off on like these two examples of games that have no character creation process, and yet both times, those characters still give me chills. And I don't know their names; they never were given names.
Yeah, there's so many games like that, and it's so wild when we encounter them and get to kind of have that sort of existential experience, which kind of elevates our thoughts of what games can be. And that's kind of the impetus of what we wanted to accomplish with Character Creation Cast, is to explore all these games and see if we could get those little tidbits of those experiences through the character creation process.
Do you ever find bleed over between certain games? Because one of the things I have mentioned is I run Dungeons. I did before the pandemic. I would run Dungeons and Dragons games at a restaurant here in Toronto, and for many of these people, D&D is going to be the only game they're going to play. But for me, playing all of these other games helps inform me to ask questions about the rules and the settings and the process, so that when I return to Dungeons and Dragons, I have much more of an informed intention when I'm running those games that I wouldn't have had if D&D can facilitate that, but it doesn't write in how. It doesn't give you the tools to do that all the time, especially with like, how does the team know each other? How are they working together? Why have they chosen this admittedly terrible life of being a vagabond adventurer? Who would do this, right? And something like Forbidden Lands gives you a bit of backstory of your tragedy that explains why you're where you are. Or one of the favorite things that came out of that I bring into every D&D game now is if you have a bard in your group, well, that bard is your chronicler of history. And the bard is always the butt end of the joke in D&D, but really without a bard. If an adventuring group dies in the woods and a bard isn't there to tell the tale, did it ever really happen? And so I always ask that bard, who in the group are you singing about? Who's the hero in your stories?
Oh, interesting.
And do they know it or not?
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Right? Because you could be singing and they don't know that when they sing about the princess and the bear, that they're actually talking about one of the characters in the group. Or they could be, doing more like a toss a coin to your Witcher, where it's very clear that they're singing about the main character in that group. And that immediately, for brand new players to D&D, it like clicks. Like it gives them a reason. It gives them an impulse to follow in the game that the player might not have had, but their character now does.
Yeah.
And have you found many examples of that kind of bleed over when you're going from one game to another, that the lessons you've learned from one begin to inform on the other, or vice versa? Because I can't help. It always happens to me.
It's kind of funny that you say that. I'm going to throw a little self-promotion thing in here. I took like the first dozen or so episodes that we went through, or the dozen or so series that we went through, and I actually started creating my own game.
Fun.
So I started working on a game that I am calling Chimera. It's a Powered by the Apocalypse game, where you blend multiple genres together and figure out what the world looks like from there, and then figure out what your characters look like from there, because you're actually blending two playbooks together as well.
And can they be playbooks from other games or specifically Chimera?
Specifically from Chimera. So like right now, we've got 3 genre modules for fantasy genre, superhero genre, and magical girls genre. Each genre module has 10 playbooks in it. And then you choose 2 playbooks.
That's a lot of playbooks for a Powered by Apocalypse game. You know that.
It is so many. It is.
Oh my goodness.
Each playbook
they've all got to fit together into this puzzle.
Yep. Each playbook has a primary page and a secondary page. And you basically say, what 2 stories do I want to blend together? It's as easy as that. Like, do I want to play the survivor from the fantasy playbook who has just been trying to survive through life, and team that up with maybe the stranded from the superhero playbook, somebody that's alien to the world that we're on, right? Either through like physically from another planet, or maybe even from another dimension or something like that, or another time.
Could you even put them into like a deck of cards and shuffle and deal them out?
Oh, I'm sure
that would combine them like randomly.
I'm sure you could.
So that reminds me a little bit of Zombie World. You have a past card and a present card and a trauma card, and they're dealt to you, and it randomly creates your beginning, middle, and present.
Oh yeah,
that's a Powered by Apocalypse game that doesn't use playbooks, because the decks create so many versions of that playbook.
I'll have to think of that.
It was Magpie Games, Zombie World. Instead of playbooks, you just have a past deck, a present deck, and a trauma deck, and you're dealt 2 cards from your present, because you get to have some control about who you currently are. You pick one, you return the other. And your past, you don't get to choose who you were, but that card begins the game face down. The rules in that card are active and are known to you as the player, but even the GM is not aware of what is under that card. And if you want to use it, there's a prompt on the instructions on the card that explain how to reveal the card. Then, so for the cop, you show someone your badge, and then it reveals to the table that you used to be a cop, and then you get access to that special playbook ability that's unique to that card.
Yeah.
But also for even the GM, you get to have that moment like, oh my goodness, you used to be a cop? You're so like I get to have that surprise moment that everyone else at the table has. The person in our group in a game I ran at a convention at Gen Con, who was like the person who did all the wet work for the team.
Yeah.
They would kill people that would come into the camp that they didn't want to keep around. And at the very end of the game was over. He just pushed someone off the top of the building. Oh. He goes, and I used to be a doctor. And he flips the card over.
Oh no.
And he's just looking down, his hands covered in blood. Now roll credits.
Wow.
Right. Yeah. And so what I just was thinking about, you've got 3 sets of playbooks
for now,
with like just under a dozen options in each set that you can mix and match.
That would be a fun way to do it.
It'd be interesting to, instead of just have 3 decks of cards.
Yeah.
And you just go boom, boom, boom. Or anyway, sorry. I don't mean to immediately start designing your game for you, but that sounds really cool. And that's so, you have to find ways to balance it so you don't end up, it does one one playbook could break the whole game.
It's so fun, but it's powered by the Apocalypse, right? And we kind of went the Masks route in terms of power levels.
Yeah.
Because in Masks, you can have literally a normal person who's like, hey, I want to be a hero. I'm going to dress up like a hero. And
another person can be Dr. Manhattan.
Yeah, exactly.
Who also happens to be a teenager.
You can literally have those two power sets on the same team, and both can be effective, right?
Yeah. Well, it's Vision and Hawkeye, right?
Yeah,
in the Avengers,
exactly.
side by side.
Yep. So that's kind of what we were going for with this. It doesn't matter what your power level is. Everything is based around emotions, right, in the game. So you've got your 5 attributes. Let's see, logical, optimistic, valiant, energetic, and relaxed. And then you've got basic moves that covers across all genres. You've got genre moves that if you include that genre in your game, you get extra basic moves. And then you've got all your playbook moves and stuff, right? So it kind of all blends together, but the whole point is I took learnings from some of the best world building games, some of the best character creation systems that we've covered on the show. And I have kind of blended the best of the best together into Chimera, along with my design partner, Amr Amaraz, who is just phenomenal as both an individual, and their brain is...
they have so many folds. There's so many folds in their brain.
So good. It's, oh my gosh. And their grasp on the math of role playing just kind of took things to an even higher level in our game, which is fantastic.
Yeah, you mentioned Brandon Lee and Gambetta, and I've seen, I follow him on Twitter, and he'll talk about like the math of like why you would choose one dice size over another in a game because of the different rules of probability that break out and having so many different permutations and choices that go into it. And that kind of thought that goes into like the statistic analysis that goes into tabletop design, that for me, I think I'd be more like you, focus more on the story being told and not on, but how does the chart break down for the percentages of success and fails, and then how much that changes if you offer in a chance to do a reroll and to add or take away dice. And and there was a conversation happening on a Facebook group on the Alien RPG, because you can push your dice rolls and you can re-roll them, and the RPG, the book itself, has a probability chart, but the debate on Facebook was like that this probability chart actually isn't correct to actual if you break down the rules it's a conversation I'm never going to be a part of. All right, I can only watch. I can't participate.
No, it's super interesting to watch, because some of those conversations led us to throwing out PBTA dice entirely, and we went with the same PBTA scale. 6 minus is a miss, 7 to 9 partial success, 10 plus full success, right? We threw out all the bonuses, so all your attributes don't give bonuses. And we threw out 2d6 as a base and just said, you get this pool of dice between d4s and d10s, assign one of each to your attributes. And if one gets upgraded, you step it up to the next size. If one gets downgraded, you step it down to the next size and roll straight. And the mathematics is you step a dice up one, that's like a +1. You step 2 dice up, that's like a +2.
And it also has a tangible effect in your hand in a way that a +1 is like this invisible, it's hard to see it.
Really interesting thing, though, is it leaves 2 through 6 being still available. So even if you had +3, the lowest number you could roll on 2d6 is a 5, right? Where here, the lowest is still 2. But the highest, we could get up to rolling a 20, interesting. Technically, with 2d10, which is really fun. So we also implemented on most of our moves 13 plus bonuses. So if you roll lucky 13 or higher, then you get something really cool that's extra. So we've been play testing it for going on 3 years now. 2017, I started designing that in October. And the current iteration where we're working towards a public release now, that's going to be coming out probably within the next month or so.
So you mentioned 2017. That predates the character creation cast.
It does.
So you've been making this game in the background.
Yeah.
While has this character creation cast then very sneakily been a form of research and development for you?
It turned out to be that way. But yeah, it was literally, I wanted to create this game because, again, another Twitter thing of me adding Adela Mithland on Twitter about something that she had commented on Pandas Talking Games. The conversation led to genre blending. There we go. That's the right word. And basically, I wanted to blend superheroes and fantasy genres together. So my first thought was, hey, I've got these Palladium Heroes Unlimited books with all these superpowers. Let's convert those superpowers to Dungeons and Dragons. 30 minutes later, I gave up on that idea because that's ridiculous. It would be an undertaking in and of itself. So I started creating something new, discovered Powered by the Apocalypse, did a bunch of research. And my first Powered by the Apocalypse game that I ever played was me running a playtest of my game at a Catacon in 2017. And it was garbage, but it was conceptually really interesting. We came up with fun characters. We came up with a fun world by just blending fantasy and superhero genres together. And I still remember those characters clear as day. And goodness, that feel of character creation has stuck across all the versions, and it has only been enhanced by everything that we've been putting into Character Creation Cast, everything that we've been learning from it. If we cover a new game that has this cool feature, I'm like, can this fit in Chimera?
So Chimera has just become this place where like all of these ideas are getting distilled
effectively,
and filtered through into this
and refined, and it's become something extremely beautiful. Probably
it's really embraced its namesake, hasn't it?
It really has. My most memorable character creation session across all games was Gen Con 2019, the Sunday of Gen Con. So this is after everything's done and winding down. Me, Rich Howard, and a few others, we created characters in a world for 5 hours straight. We didn't even have a chance to play the game. We were just vibing off of creating these characters and creating this world and creating this rich history of this world. And it blew all of our minds what we were able to come up with by just effectively collaborating together, almost GM-less at that point, right? Where I would just interject a few things here and there and say, yeah, these are the rules for this, and this is what you have to pick and everything. But goodness gracious, that went places. And still to this day, we talk about it every now and then on just how wild and in-depth the characterization can get in this game. You can definitely see my passion for character creation shining through when that's kind of the shining star of the game itself.
When you're actually playing Chimera and character creation is completed, what's the intention on how the game itself plays? It sounds like you pick one of the 3 genres as your setting. And
you actually you take two genres at least, right? And each genre during world building, you pick tropes from each of the genres. So like every genre has 10 world building tropes attached to it. So you would go and say, I want these 2 from fantasy and these 4 from superhero genres, for instance. Now you got a world that's like, 2 to 4 ratio of fantasy tropes and superhero tropes. And you blend them together to a point where it's no longer tropes for fantasy versus tropes for superheroes. It's tropes for the world that you built together.
Yeah.
And now you're telling the story of your heroes, which your playbooks define, in the world that you've built together. And you get to figure out what that looks like.
Of course, that'll be unique every single time.
Exactly. You could have the same character combinations, the same genre, the same trope combinations, and have completely different worlds.
Which feels so unique to a Powered by Apocalypse game, because even though you're part of the world building every time you play a game like Monster Hearts or a game like Masks or Apocalypse World, they're always going to be the same movie. They're just going to be like, it's always going to take place in a high school, or it's always going to take place in the wasteland, or it's always going to take place in the city of heroes. And the micro details of how this city of heroes operates, or the rules for your monsters in that high school, or the map of your wasteland, what's to the north and to the south, that'll change every time, but it's always going to be Mad Max.
Exactly.
It's always going to be Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It's always going to be Teen Titans. And this sounds like you've got a series of blenders that you've set up, blending your characters, blending your world, and then also the rules themselves as the designer of the game, where you've been blending from other games to a puree, to a point where you're not going to even tell where they're sourced from. And all of these things blend together into, by the time you go through all those stages, the game might be unrecognizable from another game at the table over playing the exact same game. Yeah,
absolutely. And we've been toying with this idea, and we actually implemented in a couple actual play streams so far, the concept of micro genre modules, where you're not introducing more playbooks, you're just introducing more rules. So Amer played with the mystery micro genre module, and for an episode, basically interjected mystery mechanics, like trying to solve a mystery through various moves and whatnot.
So you're playing this superhero fantasy game, and now you've got a little bit of Knives Out. Throw it in with a whodunit.
Yeah, you get a whodunit in there. You can have like this noir feel to it if you want, all the sort of tropes just for like an episode or two, right? So like if you're playing this at home, the whole idea is, hey, we just discovered this thing and now there's this huge mystery. Do we want to play the mystery genre for like a couple?
Kind of like how Supernatural every season would have like one weird episode that jumps genres.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got rules for like romance. We've got rules for mystery. We've got rules for horror, which I'm running with right now on my stream. And we've got rules as even for musicals. So if you want to have a musical episode in your home game, you could throw in that. And there's rules for when you can break out in song or shift the spotlight to you and all that sort of fun stuff. So
it's kind of reminding me a little bit of it predates Magpie doing Powered by Apocalypse, but the plays The Thing, the Shakespeare RPG that was made by Mark Diaz Truman.
Oh, okay.
And this whole thing was done. They've also got a module for teachers to help teach Shakespeare games. But you're part of a play troupe, and you're in Victorian England, and you're putting on a Shakespeare story.
Oh, okay.
But back then, like, Shakespeare was a notorious plagiarist. He was probably taking ideas from other theater troupes and remixing them into his own plays, sometimes on the spot or during rehearsal. And other people, especially if you're doing histories, like if you're doing Julius Caesar or something, everyone knew the story of Julius Caesar. So the actors and the other people in the troupe would start offering their own ideas to change the script. Be like, well, Julius would never say this. He would actually say this. And what we get at the end are these written down scripts of Shakespeare, not realizing that at the time these were debated and improvised and remixed and probably never really performed the same way twice. And today they're treated like the Constitution. You cannot amend it. You cannot change it. No. You cannot make any, it is dogmatic text. And that's just not true to what that originally was like. So the game tries to capture that feeling where you pick, let's say Hamlet. And as you're playing through it, you give the synopsis of what is supposed to happen, but as you're playing it, players can offer edits and changes, or change characters, or change, like, the best friend's now a horse, and they can change these stories around, or what if this time the murder doesn't happen and the wife gets away with it, and or they start changing things around, and it sounds a little not exactly the same, but like the intention is there for the players to get in and throw a screwdriver, to take a wrestling term in there, and change the plan.
Yeah. It's really interesting because this is our first time kind of playing with these micro modules, and the mystery one, when I saw it on stream, was just brilliant to kind of forward the plot like super fast, because that's kind of what they are kind of going for that one episode. So in like a 2-hour time period, they solved this huge mystery that, you know, effectively pushed them towards the end of the campaign. In mine, I'm drawing out the horror a bit more. And so we're going into like episode 4, I think right now, 3 or 4 of the horror module.
You could literally do the Christmas special.
You could,
with those rules.
you could, yeah. And I'm finding out after this horror module is done, because we're doing eldritch horror mixed in with all 3 other genres. So we've got fantasy, superhero, and magical girls, as well as eldritch horror. And we're about to get to a point where they're going to discover kind of some devastation that that has happened on the surface while they've been stuck underground for 2 sessions. And and now
it's like the final scene in Cloverfield Lane,
right?
Where you find out that upstairs it's very different than what you think it's going to be.
Yeah, and we're working towards a big kaiju battle, effectively, right?
Does that mean a new genre where now we're going into monster movie, like giant big monster like Kong versus Godzilla, Pacific Rim?
That could be a possibility, right? We don't have that fleshed out, but for now, I'm just like, okay, once we pull this horror module away, once they get rid of the threat, the horror module goes away. Now there's all this devastation they have to deal with.
Yeah.
In their regular game.
There's all this fallout.
Yeah, exactly. So like the modules are meant to just get slotted in, do what they need to do, get slotted out.
And then leave a big old mess that you got to clean up. Like you just had a big old house party and then everyone's left and you got to do the dishes.
Yeah. You could also play with them exclusively through the whole campaign if you wanted to. So you could just play a whole horror campaign, and then after a while your characters start, you know, getting knocked off because that's part of the mechanics of the horror module. And you could deal with it at that point too. It's just so interesting the directions that we've seen these games go from. Very traditional stories to like really emotional, heart-wrenching stories to just real interesting cosmic sort of level.
Well, when you're ready to start sharing and getting that game out, I would love to give this a try.
Absolutely.
And check it out, because it does sound like, given I have loved Powered by Apocalypse games on the show and playing through them and doing that and just to kind of have that, it also feels like a love story to that whole genre of tabletop being told that you've done. And every Powered by Apocalypse game is, by its namesake, a hack of Apocalypse World. And some games, especially I guess earlier on, games like Monster Hearts or Sprawl or Masks, you can see which parts of Apocalypse World they took and which parts they discarded. Other games like Bluebeard's Bride, they get hacked a little bit more, and it's a little bit harder to identify the source of where it came from. This one sounds like less of a hack and more like a puree.
Exactly.
As I mentioned, where you have blended things so smooth that it becomes something new on the other end. Yeah,
you can see a lot of influences from Masks, as well as Descent into Midnight. Those are 2 of our biggest influencers from the PBTA genre.
And have you been influenced by other non-PBTA games as well?
I'm sure we have.
There's just so much that it's hard to even know.
Yeah, exactly. Like, where did this come from? Who knows?
It's safe to assume without the character creation cast, Chimera would just not be in the form it is today.
No, absolutely not. It wouldn't be nearly as good as it is. And the lessons that I've learned because of character creation cast have just skyrocketed not only like my appreciation for character creation in other systems, especially new ones that I haven't encountered before, but it's also giving me an insight into kind of how character creation systems are designed, right? And that's kind of the big hook into how I, along with Eimer, blended all of this together into this Chimera soup of character creation.
we go through some older games like Cyberpunk or Palladium games.
Yeah.
And there was a time, I guess, maybe in the 90s where every character creation system really just felt like the same one, even though but the rules of the game were different once you actually started playing, and like the way they would handle, mostly the way they would handle combat, because a lot of these games were very combat focused. But character creation didn't matter if you were doing Dungeons and Dragons or Conan or Mutants and Masterminds or any of those other classics. They were all very much, once you saw the character sheet, there's my character, there's my 6 or 7 stats, my equipment, my power sets, like they're all laid out very much the same way. And then like something once we turned the millennium, like a switch went off. Yeah. And games like Dogs in the Vineyard started coming out, or games where the character creation involved world building as well, or had characters where the stats were fluid or changing, or had instead of I'm thinking like Mouse Guard, where you have belief systems written into your character that your character never leaves someone behind, or your character always stands up for those who are weaker, and they're baked in now to your character sheet, where the story becomes part of the character creation rather than one of my criticisms. We did Cyberpunk Red a few weeks ago, and it has like a lifespan creation process that gives your character a background, but none of that informs the character mechanically in the game. Yeah. None of that has any kind of feedback into your stats or your skills, your equipment, anything. You could you do one part, the stat building, and you do the other part, the story building, and they're completely independent from one another.
Oh, interesting.
Whereas the same lifespan creation is the same phrase used in Star Trek Adventures. And in Star Trek Adventures, the lifespan creation process, if you grew up in a colony world, you get +2 to daring. And if you went into operations and you had an event where you lost a friend who died on an away mission, you get a medical skill or some kind of focus based on treating that or for the therapy you went through afterwards, and you pick up skills and focuses and changes to your stats that are directly informed by your career up to the point where the game begins. And so you get an origin story and you get a character sheet, and they're completely intertwined. This is why I'm daring, because one time I got in a shuttle crash and I had to bring the ship down, and I was the only survivor. And and so that explains why my stat is so high there. Or this is why I chose command, because one time the Romulans attacked and the command crew, the bridge was taken out, and I was the highest ranking officer on the ship, and I had to take over. And so that explains all these things. And now you have these stories before the game begins. And there was a time where, Dungeons and Dragons always encouraged you to write an origin story. Yes. But it wasn't affected by when you rolled your stats.
Exactly. And those games where you could create your characters separately, right? And then just bring them all to the table.
Well, and then it creates a problem in Dungeons and Dragons. How many stories do we have where you think you have a certain character? I'm playing a very competent cleric who is a demon hunter. And the minute I go up against a demon and I just get smacked around. It's like, well, I guess my entire origin story is a falsehood, because I'm not this competent character. And then so many D&D games end up turning into less like the A-Team and a little bit more like the Three Stooges.
Especially at first,
right, where you don't know, and there's these stumbling blocks where you're having to figure out what kind of character you actually have on your sheet compared to the character you thought you had in your head. And more games are coming out now, games like Masks, where the character you have in your head is the character on your sheet. They're the same character. They are competent. They are professional. They can do this thing that you as a player might not even be able to conceptualize at the time.
Yeah, my local group, actually, we started playing Beyond the Wall in 2019, which is an OCR sort of game, fantasy genre, traditional. A lot more rules light than Dungeons and Dragons, but it's still a little chunky. And it has a nice balance there. But the thing I love about it is the character creation. First of all, you build a village together, right? And as part of character creation, you answer these questions of your character's past. Usually you'll be rolling on these tables, and then that'll give you like connections of where your character came from. And every now and then there's like an option for adding a place to your town. And then another question will have an option for adding an NPC to the town. So you're not only defining your character, you're defining places and people in your small village.
You've got this map already.
You literally have a map as part of the game. You are, okay, now draw that blacksmith that you just created.
That's great.
And tell us where this person lives, that sort of stuff. Once you're done, you have a map of your village, you have a list of NPCs from your village, and you have a backstory of where your character came from. And these are supposed to be like younger characters, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the whole point of the game is you grew up in this village your whole life. Now it's time to go beyond the wall and see what's out there. And whether you're pulled out there by fate or you decide to go adventuring, you know, that's all up to the group and everything. But just having all of that meaty backstory built into your characters and having all these little things to pull on. Yeah, it's just been such a joy seeing all of that pulled out. Like my character, one of the things I rolled is they had, they're a noble character. Mm-hmm. They are part of the most prominent, wealthy family in the area. And that shaped our town tremendously. But my character apparently hung out with the commoners more than with her family. And my character actually had a tryst with one of the commoners. And that NPC is now a prominent support character on our adventures.
Interesting.
Which is really interesting because they've got a hirelings and allies system in this game that allows these NPCs to come along as extra helper characters.
Yeah.
So this best friend of mine effectively is now like, hey, I want to come on the adventure with you because then I can help watch your back. And then I'm saying, sure, and I will watch yours. Creates this wonderful bit of drama that wouldn't have been there had those like backstory things not been part of character creation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it just works out really well. I love it so much.
I'm writing all these names down of these games I'm going to check out. 3-4 years of character creation. You've taken the best of the best and you're distilling it into the fine, triple filtered brew that will become Chimera. And along this time, what are some of the pitfalls or takeaways of things to avoid in character creation? What are when you're opening up a game that you haven't gone through before and you see, oh, this again? What is there anything like that out there that, I guess my pet peeve that I just mentioned with Cyberpunk Red, how the origin story information and the character stats become so disconnected that they might as well be two different characters.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you've come across that you would plead designers to avoid or at least be more mindful of if this is the choices they're going to make?
Well, I mean, there's so many games where you have to shoehorn in safety mechanics, which I'm a big proponent of using safety mechanics at the table so you can have a safer game, so you can actually push boundaries while keeping everybody safe at the table.
If you're all wearing your mouth guards and you got your helmets on and you're wearing your gloves and you're in a boxing match, you don't have to hold as many punches because you've got safety in mind now and you can actually box.
Exactly.
Whereas if you're just going bare knuckle boxing, you're going to knock teeth out.
Exactly.
And it's Kate Bullock, who's now the community manager over at Magpie, who is a local con organizer here in Toronto, who we were in a car ride and she mentioned to me going, a game that doesn't have safety mechanics built into the rules is like a car that doesn't have seatbelts.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't get into a car if it didn't have any seatbelts.
Yep.
And some of the older cars that are out there, classic cars on the road, don't have seatbelts because back in the 50s, they weren't required.
Yep.
And so understanding that when you're going to these classic games, that's just going to be par for the course. Mm-hmm. But brand new games being built without airbags and without seatbelts shouldn't be acceptable.
Exactly. You have to modify it yourself and throw your own safety rules in there.
Yeah. And the X card is a great safety tool.
Yeah.
But so many games now that the X card is out there, I feel like they give it a token mention on a page. And then it's like, great, now that you know about safety tools, let's get back to the game. Rather than a game that incorporates safety into its DNA.
Exactly. Yeah, so it's starting to become more prominent that is, kept in mind, but it's not prominent enough yet.
No.
So, I mean, that's probably the biggest one is you always have to keep safety in mind when you're going into these games. And one of the things that we put together for the show is we have character evolution cast episodes, or before the pandemic. In the before times, we used to do a series which was all player-driven advice episodes called Character Evolution Cast. So it was the evolution of the character creation cast moniker. This eventually spawned us to create a session 0 document that can be applied to all games. If you go to session0.charactercreationcast.com, it'll get you right there. That has like a list of steps, I guess you could say, if you're not familiar with how to do a session 0 of a game. We kind of outline your options in this document, including a whole slew of different safety tools and where to find them and credit where credit is due. And following along in this, like creating your characters as a group is a thing you should be doing. Not every game requires that, right?
No.
Now, PBTA almost has to, because you're all linked together in some way, shape, or form usually.
Some prep work can be done in advance if you have a concept in mind, but the nuts and bolts are going to be questions you're going to ask each other.
Yeah.
So you have to be there to ask those questions.
Yeah.
Even if it's on a Discord channel.
And talking to each other is like say what you want. Metagame talk is not a bad thing, in my opinion. And if you can say, hey, in the next few sessions, it would be cool if I could see my character do this. Well, now you've just like put a potential cool plot point out there that you can all experience at the table together, right?
It's one of those things that came out doing actual play podcasts where in order to get our story recorded in a single hour at a time, we would have to have a little bit of a breakdown before we started going, okay, what do we want to accomplish in this next hour?
Yes.
Oh, you want to go and have, get the people in a riot so we can take on the city watch and free the people from the prison. Okay. So now we know kind of where we want to storyboard ahead of time.
Yeah.
And we did that because so many games we were recording for the podcast were falling, like we were running out of time. We were going overtime. It was like, how can we be more focused with our intention? And, well, I should also be doing these in my table games when we're not recording, because there's nothing wrong with going like, what does your character want to accomplish today, right? And some games like 7th Sea have that written in, like again, baked into the character sheet, where you write in your story arc that like, if you can accomplish this in this next hour, then you can get some additional advances to your character. That's also an indicator to the GM at the game going, this person wants to accomplish this in the next hour. So now the prerogative is on me is to open those doors to allow that to be accomplished. And that's not going to happen if you don't talk to each other. What is your 1 hour goal?
Yeah.
Something as simple as that.
Yeah. And it's interesting because when you have that meta knowledge of the other characters, sure, some of the like personal surprise might not be there when those reveals do happen.
Sure.
But it's so much more satisfying when you can subtly like affect the story that pushes the story towards your friend's character's like ultimate goal. Right.
Okay. I've done 5 of these interviews, and this is the 5th time I'm mentioning it in every single interview. Once again, I am brought back to Worldwide Wrestling, the RPG.
Yes.
The greatest game ever committed to pencil, ever committed to ink. And part of that, mentioning that with meta rules, pro wrestling is constantly getting meta with itself. Yeah. Constantly being like, at the end of tonight, it's the no holds barred total cage match, title match event of the year, and tune in tonight. So we know that's coming.
Yes.
So every single time you're cutting a promo, you're talking to a player, you're doing any of the build-up matches, or you're running in and interrupting, at the end of this session, we are having that no holds barred cage match, title match thing. And everything is aiming towards this. And so it gives everyone a target to stay on to. And, every time I mention it, and you're not one of them because you already know the game. When I mention World of Wrestling, the RPG for the first time, someone they go, "Oh, come on," and they think it's a joke. I'm not kidding.
It's
this
so good.
game, you do not expect. You do not have to be a wrestling fan. I am not a wrestling fan. If you go into this game, it is going to teach you how to tell a story. And you don't realize it's going to. It's going to teach you how to build connections with other characters. It's going to tell you how those relationships matter and how to build tension to then very, in an exhilarating way, in a very rewarding way, release that tension and then have those arcs wrap up. And it's all built into the mechanics of the game where you're building heat to get momentum, to generate audience. And then every time you're doing color commentary or cutting promos or trash talking to the people at the table, it's all filling in because pro wrestling is just a soap opera without any of the nuance.
Exactly.
Right? When people walk out onto the ramp, you immediately know who to cheer for. You immediately know who to boo for.
Yep.
And some other games revel in that nuance, but the players at the table need to know who to cheer for and need to know who to boo. Even if the characters don't, we need to know when you're watching, even when you're watching like a mystery movie, you're watching like Ocean's 11 and all the characters are too cool to talk about. As the audience, the camera pans away and we see the evil eye, shift around and we know who's about to, we can tweak a little bit on who's about to betray the group and force out. Like that is fun. Like you don't have to, if you're planning to betray the group in the final hour and blow the bomb where they're all still in the building, don't be afraid to break that fourth wall and let the players see your character putting the detonator into their pocket.
Yeah.
Now the characters can't react to that, but everyone at the table now has that added tension that if we were watching Die Hard, you would see and you would want to see as the audience. If at the very last minute Hans Gruber pulled out some stupid machinima moment, it would cheapen the whole movie.
Yeah.
But we know when he's got something over McClane before McClane does. And so it's okay to tell the players something that your character doesn't know.
Exactly.
We're so afraid about nerd poker. We're so afraid about tipping our hand. and we don't want to reveal that I've got this royal flush ready to go.
Yep.
So, that's part of the storytelling is you want to let you play with your cards up sometimes.
Yeah. And that's what the safety mechanics are for too, right? And that actually goes hand in hand in safety mechanics sometimes because I know there's a lot of instances of personal betrayal being a line for some people, right?
Yeah.
So you don't want to just spring that on people. That's something that you should be like, okay, we're going to play this. Even if it's, okay, if you're playing a heist game, right? And it's going to be 10 sessions long. If at the beginning you say, hey, near the end of this, if I betray you all, is that cool? And everybody's like, yeah, that'd be awesome. But then you play it straight until that very last session.
Yeah, and you might
probably forget about it. And then it'll be a huge surprise still. But that's
a really good point. You might have someone at the table where that could be harmful.
Exactly.
And you don't want to, what you think is this really clever twist that you're going to pull ends up being something that triggers a person at the table and has them relive a terrible moment. You don't want to do, that's not worth a twist.
That's not fun. If everybody at the table is not having fun, then something needs to change, right? And if somebody is in distress during a game, either outwardly or inwardly, that's not good. And having these safety tools in the game allows people to be more comfortable to say, no, I don't think we should have this in the game, with or without explanation. Right.
We did have a moment like that happen on our show years ago. We kept the recording in there with the permission from the player.
Yeah.
We were playing a game of Monster Hearts and someone at the table did betray. And we had a character, a player had to leave early. So it was decided between that hour that character was going to get killed off and the big bad was going to reveal themselves. But then in play, one of the players sided with the big bad and left our character chained up in a basement for terrible things to happen.
Yes.
And now the language I would use is at that moment, safety was broken.
Yes.
And we didn't know, we hadn't had those conversations about safety tools at that point. We just didn't know. And he got very upset, left the room. We came back. We had to talk about it. We were able to bring things back. The game had really gotten under his skin. And all of the accomplishments of the previous couple hours were being taken away as the villain was winning. And at this moment, he had just lost in the narrative quite everything.
Yeah.
And at this point now, the game was just not enjoyable.
Right.
And so we had to have a talk about, okay, well, what are we going to do to, bring things back in and try and repair the damage that had been done. But if we had a conversation like you're suggesting in advance of, would it be okay if I betrayed the group at some point in the game? Like, are we okay with that kind of player versus player behavior?
Yes.
Or is death going to be something that is at stake here? Because not every Powered by Apocalypse game has death built in. And are these yes or no or yellow light where we're going to check in and see, are we still okay with this? And if we had that conversation, the exact game would probably still have played out.
Yep.
We just wouldn't have had that moment in the middle where someone almost quit the game.
Exactly.
And had to walk out and got very upset. And if we had found, we could have avoided that harm from happening.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's why it's so important to have these tools baked into the systems themselves. So it can be front and center before you even play the game, saying, hey, this is not optional. Yeah. This is something that when you're playing this game, you're going to be using these tools, just as you use dice, just as you use pencil and paper or a PDF, just as you use your imagination. You need to be using these safety tools so that everybody at the table knows that their opinion, that their feelings are taken into account, and that nobody's going to just pull a 180 just for the sake of being clever. Whether or not, it's a good storytelling choice, that's up to debate, depending on the group, of course. But just having that chance of breaking safety, especially when you're going in deeper, especially if you're playing something like along the lines of a horror genre. Yeah. You want to make sure things are okay ahead of time.
Especially when you're playing with people's personal fears.
Exactly.
You're already playing something that is going to try and intentionally push that envelope.
Yeah.
And if you're listening to our conversation and you're wondering, how does that manifest? Like the X card, I think, makes sense to a lot of people now.
Yeah.
And it works. But how do you work in a safety mechanic into the game? And one example that was brought to me, I didn't realize was a safety mechanic built into the game, but it absolutely was. I mentioned Bluebeard's Bride earlier.
Yeah.
Bluebeard's Bride is a horror game where you are playing one character.
Yep.
You're all aspects of that character, the sisters that live within the bride, the bride's psyche. And the bride is navigating this horror house where her husband is a serial killer and is probably going to kill her at the end of the game. Like we tell the fairy tale at the beginning of the game so that everyone is aware that this betrayal is very likely to happen. So that it is not caught off guard that we are playing a game about a serial killer and that you are going to become that victim.
Yep.
And the act of telling the fairy tale is a safety tool. So that you all know about it. But also in the game itself, it's a Powered by Apocalypse game. One of the moves is called Shiver with Fear. And it is the only move in the game that is affected by the player, not the character.
Oh, interesting.
If a player at the table shudders from fear at something that was just mentioned at the table, the GM is to ask them what they are afraid about. They will tell them, and the GM will tell them how it is worse. And if they have the ring, they have a choice to keep the ring on, and which is at that moment they're the one who's in command of the main character, or they can pass the ring to someone else. They don't get as many bonuses if they do; they chicken out, but they can hand the ring off to someone else and let them deal with that scene now. And so that allows you to opt in and opt out of this scene, but it also, by offering up what you are afraid about, and then the GM telling you how it's worse, you're also offering a consent of, this is what I want to include in this horror game. It's not a negative thing. It was a move that when we played the game, everyone avoided using because it felt like they were admitting a weakness.
Yeah.
When in reality, now I know better to frame that as, this is one of the safety tools in the game.
Yeah.
You are going to tell me what you're afraid about because you want this detail in the game as an indicator of, these are the things that not only am I afraid about, but these are also the things that I enjoy in horror.
Yeah. Yes.
and I want to have in my horror stories. And so then I can amplify that. And then if I go too far and I amplify it too much, one, we have the X card, we can always rewind. And two, if it's a little bit into the yellow zone and you're just like, oh, that's really creepy, but I don't want to be a part of this, you can hand the ring and someone else can now deal with that. And the person has to accept the ring that's being given to them. So if another person at the table was like, I don't want this, they can refuse to put the ring on. And then until someone at the table says it. And if no one wants it, then the GM, you roll it back. Well, maybe it's not as bad.
Exactly.
We can find something else that you're afraid of.
Yeah.
But that's an example of a safety tool that isn't called a safety tool.
Yes.
Right? It's just the move in the game.
Of the game.
It's just part of the game. And it's just designed so that unconsciously the game is helping to navigate you around these landmines that can be in the narrative of an interactive horror.
Yeah.
Because when you go to watch a horror movie, it's a little bit different. Someone else is telling you the story. When you're involved in that and you're complicit in it and you're interacting with it and offering details to it, it becomes a very different level.
It's so much different.
But that's a good example, though. Of, I've seen debates on Twitter of people complaining about how unfair it is to ask for you to work in these rules because sometimes they don't work to your narrative or to your rules. But if Bluebeard's Bride, a game that deals with the themes that it deals with, can work in one move that is just designed with the intention of keeping safety at the table.
Oh, exactly.
Then I don't know. I don't think anyone else has an excuse.
Yeah, exactly. I know, like for horror,
you're just lacking creativity,
right? And I know there are easy tools that you can incorporate in any games. Lines and veils is like the base one that I always go to. Lines, things you won't have show up in the games. Period. No questions asked. Submit it to the GM anonymously or not, and then the GM says, "Okay, these things are lines. We're not going to, none of these will come up in the story, period.
They won't come up, they won't be joked about, they won't be referenced, they won't be alluded to.
Exactly.
They do not exist in this universe.
Yes. And then the veils are things that can happen, but we're just going to fade to black. We'll not show it. One of the biggest things is like, sexual stuff.
Yeah, the camera's going to look up to the curtain, and the curtain's going to move into the moonlight, and we know what's going on, but the cameras, it's just not going to happen in frame.
Exactly. Or like excessive gore, things like that. Yeah. Things like, okay, it happened, but we don't need to describe it.
Yeah,
right?
like even a PG-13 movie can have an axe going through a head, but the camera isn't going to show that. We're just going to see the axe go down, hear the sound. We know what happened, but we don't have to describe it.
Exactly. But one thing I like to do for horror games is add a third list of fears. So before we even play...
Cult Divinity Lost has a horror contract that you write that has an invitation.
Yeah.
What are you inviting to this game?
Exactly. So I had my players for the stream that I'm running give me a list of things they would love to see in the game that they are afraid of personally, but that wouldn't be too scary to put into a game, right?
Yeah.
So now I've got this list of like a dozen items that I can just be like, total darkness. That's going to happen at some point. Total darkness interrupted by, like a big thunderstorm where all you can see with the light is the flash of lightning. Yeah, It's stuff like that.
That's very Silent Hill,
haunted dolls was on the list as well. So I can throw in these little tidbits.
Creepy clown laughter.
The little tidbits here and there from this list of fears that have just enhanced their enjoyment of this module. And my goodness, having lines and veils and if you're playing horror fears, or I guess you could almost apply that to almost any other genre of like, what sort of tropey things would you love to see in this
if you're doing a heist game, what is it about heists that you like?
Yeah.
What's your favorite? What's the favorite thing? Is it the planning bit? Is it the flashbacks? Is that moment at the very end where they go, aha, actually, I already switched the bags around earlier, and then you go through and you retcon everything. Some people hate that part of a heist movie.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So tell me, what is it? Is it the ensemble? Is it the getting the team together? Like, what is it about heists that you really enjoy?
Yeah,
and then if you, because that might be something that I might cut for time. I might be like, we don't have time to get the gang together, so we're just going to start with the job. And you'd be like, oh, but that's like the whole The whole part where Brad Pitt goes to the pool hall and convinces the guy to join the team. That's that's the best part of the movie. Okay. All right. Then that's what we have to focus on.
Exactly. Yeah. And having those conversations beforehand in a session 0, session 0.5, session 0.75, doesn't matter how long it takes. Getting all those fun bits out there is going to make it so when you actually play the game, especially if you're planning for a campaign, like people play campaigns for years sometimes.
And if you have a bad session 0, you might not get to session 2.
Why wouldn't you spend a week, a session, 2 sessions, 3 sessions planning and getting what you want out of a 3-4 year.
Yeah. A TV show doesn't just start with the pilot. A TV show starts with the show Bible that's written for years before they even commit to a pilot, which is, again, not even the show itself.
Yeah.
And so what is your show Bible? What is it about your characters? Who might get introduced in the future? Like, it is not bad during session 0 to describe who the ultimate villain of this world might be. You won't mention it when the game starts because we don't know about this person yet. But even in, like, again, back to Shakespeare, you've got your list of characters and it'll be like Banquo, so-and-so and so-and-so. And you have like, you know who's on the cast list. You know who's on the IMDb page of your game before you start playing. And you know what? If someone is just not into a necromancer as your ultimate villain, that's a good, maybe find that out in session 0.
Exactly.
Before you commit to a 7-year arc.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Where at the end of that, you go like, the necromancer. And they go like,
oh, jeepers, not the That has nothing to do with what we've been doing for the past 6 years.
Right, exactly.
It's like, I mean, it doesn't, it kind of sours the previous 6 years. Yeah, but goodness, it could have been so much better, right?
If everyone had just talked about Lost before they recorded it, then maybe that finale would have been fine, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and also having a show Bible means, like, when I played, the last time I played like a super long D&D game was when I was in college.
Yeah.
Too long ago now, but it was like a 7 or 8 year long game, but it wasn't one DM either. And when the DM would get exhausted, they would want to become a player and we would rotate around. Eventually one of us at every point in the game, we all ran the game.
Yeah.
And so if you've got that session 0 template of what the intention, what is your big, like, 7-year plan, right? Like when George Kaczynski wrote Babylon 5, he had his 5-year plan already written out. He knew where he wanted the major beats to be. If you do that in your session 0 as your group and everyone's part of it, I mean, you might forget about it by the 5th year, but when the next GM takes over the game, they've got, I remember we were supposed to have, you know, a big war breakout in the 3rd year. So so we can kind of stay true to that to a degree, and you don't end up having, I guess, like the bickering director thing that happened with Star Wars, where you've got the next one coming in retconning everything that happened in the previous movie.
Right. And of course it doesn't have to get that detailed. I know in our Beyond the Wall sessions with my local group.
But do you want to play a game in Dungeons and Dragons where you ultimately form a guild? Is that your goal? Or do you want to just be adventurers? Right? Do you want to retire and become king? Do you want to reclaim your throne?
What sort of end goal does your character have in mind? Yeah.
Aragorn has a theme when you first meet him as Strider, and he has to go through everything before he becomes the king of Gondor. But it doesn't hurt to maybe mention in the beginning of, like, this is what I would love to see. I would love to see my character start as a ranger and end as a paladin.
Yes.
Right. And like, maybe I don't have that figured out, but I would love to look into cross-classing as I'm playing through the game.
Yeah.
Or I would love to, you know, if I'm playing in Star Trek, I want my character to be captain one day. That's my career goal. What do you like the whole, like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Conversation doesn't hurt. Like, that might not happen in your game, but at least lets me know as a GM why you're playing.
Yeah. I think a lot of people have backstories in mind when they start a game, but having a, like,
what's your dreams of the future?
What's your dreams? What's your character's dream of where they want to go?
Yeah.
Where are they going? Because you don't just take a character with a backstory, plop them into the world, and then have them say, well, I don't know what to do. Let story happen at me and I'll figure it out. No, they've got, they were probably like, you know, at the very least, I want to go to the baker and get a pastry because I was hungry for pastries, and now that's a character
maybe my
choice.
Goal today is I just want to drink.
Yeah,
right? Like
exactly.
Geralt of Rivia, that is his goal every other day.
Yeah.
He just wants to get this job done so he can go back to the pub. And, that's good. That's good fodder to know for the story.
Yeah.
Because then as a GM, I'm just going to make sure you're always something else keeps coming up. And you're just like,
Exactly.
I hate this job. And it just becomes a bit of an ongoing joke.
Yeah.
And one of these things, this conversation about communication, it doesn't end at session 0.
No.
I mentioned Kate earlier. She also has another really great thing she does at her table games that she mentioned to me. And I'm just going to give her full credit for it. She called them love letters.
Yes.
And as a GM, between sessions, she writes letters to the other characters in character to them. So when they arrive at their next game, they act as a kind of in-world recap of what happened, so you remember the story, but also gives them something to aim for. And then they can write back to the GM and become like pen pals between sessions.
Oh, nice.
Which gives indications of this is what I'm hoping, or this is how I felt about what just went down in the last job. And I really hope the next time we can do better with blank, blank, blank. And all of this, it's still immersive.
Yeah.
But it also builds relationships between NPCs and
absolutely.
PCs and the GM and the PC. And it gives everyone an indication as a way to consistently check in as you're playing the game of like, is this going well? Is this going badly? Or going like, I really didn't think we were just going the whole time just fighting goblins every single day. I really wish we could go and maybe just, help people instead of just constantly fighting monsters or creatures that might not be monsters and are just actually poorly bad racial stereotypes.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And we actually covered a concept of the 8 kinds of fun that you can have in any type of game on Character Creation Cast. And like that whole concept of let's just battle things is a challenge type of fun, right? So battling things, solving puzzles, that sort of stuff. People that love challenge love those sorts of things.
Making friends is a challenge.
Yeah.
Going into town and just making contacts and getting to know who lives there.
Yeah. So
Dungeons and Dragons mentions that the 3 pillars of their game are exploration, social, and combat.
Exactly.
But when 80% of your book is dedicated to combat rules,
it's going to be combat.
It makes you think that's the most important part of the game.
Exactly. And when your experience is almost 100% from combat, it becomes the most important part of your game, right? But when you have this conversation of the 8 kinds of fun with your group, you can figure out what your players love to do in the game and what your players want to get out of the game. It gives you this language that you can say. It's like, well, I love exploration. I love challenge. But then this other player says, I love story, but you know what? I also love exploration. Now you're going to have a game that's a lot of focus on exploration and discovery.
And exploration and story can be the same thing, because sometimes in a game like Forbidden Lands, exploration ties itself into the lore of the land.
Yeah.
And you learn about the origins of this location or the legends that surround it, which then feed into the story. So when you're ready to do story, you've picked up all these stories that you can mention the next time you're in a town.
Yeah,
and you can ask about this, is that real? Did that king really go off to that castle with his army and that war chest is still buried out there?
Yes.
And like that's exploration technically.
Yeah. No, yeah, absolutely.
But it's also very much feeds the if story is like the secondary thing that's important to them.
Yeah. Like if there's one episode I would recommend of Character Creation Cast for people to check out with their groups, not just by themselves, it would be the 8 Kinds of Fun episode with Jim McClure, because it has changed people's groups for the better. Because people were just assuming things beforehand. Yeah. But then they had these conversations and like, we haven't been doing that at all. Or we've been doing way too much and none of you are that enthused about that type of play. Maybe we should rework the way we play. And then you work towards those 2 or 3 types of fun that people have kind of in common together with a little bit of the other stuff here and there as the game demands. And your game sessions are going to be mind-blowing in comparison.
And it sounds like when I first came on to the Terrible Warriors, it was all Dungeons and Dragons or Dungeons and Dragon-like games that I had played. Yeah. And then I found Monster Hearts and we played that and it was this eye-opening experience like, wow, an RPG can be this as well. Yeah. It can also do that. And not everyone is going to have the opportunity to play other games. If you're in a specific group who's been playing one game of West End Star Wars since the 80s, that's going to be the game you're going to play. And you're not going to try something else. And then you might not become aware of these other styles or other intentions of gameplay. And so I will link to your 8 Kinds of Fun episode in our show notes so that people can go for it. Ryan, we've gone...
a little bit over.
And so obviously there's a lot more. I hope I can have you back on again because I would love to talk more about Chimera or I know you've got other projects, other podcasts that you're a part of.
Absolutely.
And I'd love to talk about that. If we want to follow up with you, where can we find you? Where can we follow you? Where should we go?
Easiest place to follow me is on Twitter at Lord Neptune, all one word. And that's Neptune as in the Sailor Scout, not Neptune as in the planet or god. Still spelled the same. And
I was about to say, are they spelled differently? No, they're not.
No, they're
Thanks.
not.
Great.
But you can actually find Chimera if you're interested. You can find Chimera on Twitter at Chimera RPG, or you can go to chimera.games. I'm also online at lordneptune.com. You can find Character Creation Cast at Creation Cast on Twitter or charactercreationcast.com. We're also on the One Shot Podcast Network. You can find some other projects that I'm in. Let's see. I do audio sound design for A Horror Borealis, which is an actual play podcast that uses Monster of the Week as their game of choice that goes over a story in a small town in Alaska in the 1990s. But right now they are playing the Monster of the Week supplement by Christine Previs called Back to Derry, where they are retelling the story of Stephen King's It through improvisational role play.
Excellent.
And I am doing the sound design for that. It is some of my best work yet. If you are a fan of horror, if you are a fan of It, if you're a fan of being scared, 100% check out Losers, A Love Story, a game about fixing all the bad things in Stephen King's It and making a better story from the ashes.
That sounds amazing.
It is so good.
That's great. Ryan, thank you so much for spending so much time with us today. This was a very long conversation because I can only imagine we have so much more to say. I want to have you come back because I dipped my toe into editing audio, music, and effects into some other podcasts in the past year. And maybe I have you back. We do like a inside the actor studio kind of thing. Where we can just talk about like some of the choices we make when we're doing this for other shows.
Yeah, I would love that.
It's really interesting to me being able to elevate other recordings.
Yeah.
I'm not in it,
Yep.
but I can add beats and music and foreshadowing into the stories with the music I've got on hand in my library to work in. And,
absolutely.
And it's so rewarding to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to have you back and maybe we can talk about that.
Yeah, this was a blast. I would absolutely love to be back sometime.
And for you, my dear listener, thank you so much for hanging out with us. Check the show notes because all the games, all the episodes we've been mentioning, these other projects, there's a lot of them. And I can forgive you for not having a notepad yourself while you're listening to this, while you're doing whatever you were doing. They're all listed. All the links are in the show notes, available also at terriblewarriors.com, where we have also separated a whole section of podcast spotlights for all the other podcasts we've been interviewing on the show, as well as, very related to this conversation, our Session Zero series. We revamped the homepage on terriblewarriors.com. So it's got the Session Zero section, the Spotlight section, as well as a rotating slideshow of all of the games we've been running since the very first year. I know for a bit, I went through a little bit of an identity crisis and I removed all of the old episodes from our past and vaulted them. But the pandemic has had me reevaluate everything. It's all back. Every single episode from the very first day of Terrible Warriors, warts and all. So I'm sorry, there's some stuff in there I'm not proud of, but go back and it sounded bad. The microphones were not plugged in correctly. And go back and have a listen. It's all available right from the very first day, available at terriblewarriors.com, as well as patreon.com/terriblewarriors. We're still going strong. We're still running private games every month if you want to join in on that. Any of the games we've mentioned in our Session Zero series I've been running. We've run through games of Spire as well. We love Spire, and we just did Morkborg, and we had a real blast with it. And I think Blades in the Dark we're going to be doing soon. So that's have a look in that. And if that's your jam, that's how you'd like to support the show, you can join in. But also follow us on Patreon for free, because I offer weekly or bi-weekly updates on the state of the show, because I know Terrible Warriors is going through a bit of a flux right now. And so if you want to know what I'm doing and why I'm doing it and how I'm doing it, I bear all in those little blog posts, and I put them up there if you're interested in that. And I understand if you're not, that's fine too. Hang out with us on Twitter at Dice Warriors, and we got our Discord channel where right now I'm just talking about the Yakuza video games. That's kind of the only topic, that and our theories about WandaVision. So it's all stuff that isn't just tabletop happening on that Discord channel. Come join us. It's a lot of fun. Some of the people have joined up and made their own tabletop groups in that. So if you're looking for players to join in a game, if you're interested in some of their live streams that they're doing, we've got a fun little active community on our Discord channel. You'd be more than welcome to join us at. And certainly, Ryan, do you have a Discord channel or a Patreon page or other things yourself?
You could actually go to discord.charactercreationcast.com to get our Character Creation Cast Discord. You could also go to discord.chimera.games to get to our Chimera RPG Discord. Those are the only two that I technically own that aren't a private Discord. So you could find me there. You could chat with me there. You could chat with me on Twitter. I am a 100% an open book for people to ask questions at, because I love interacting with people. So
it's true. I reached out to him as a cold call on Twitter a week ago, and he just sat down and recorded a 1-hour interview with me.
And it's been an absolute blast. So
thank you again, Ryan, for joining us, and thank you for joining us, my dear listener. Until we meet again, don't exactly know what's coming up very much next, but follow us on Twitter to find out. I'm hoping it's going to be a Session Zero game that we're recording very soon, but we will return with more Terrible Warriors. And until that fateful day, when we're all back together rolling dice at the table, be good to each other. Bye.
Bye.